They always tell you in America that a smile can light up a room, but they never mention that sometimes a smile can burn the whole house down with your family still inside. My cheating wife had that kind of smile. She wore it like a mask, the type of smile that could charm the pastor on Sunday morning and the bartender on Friday night. At first, I thought it was her gift. Later, I realized it was her weapon. Life in our quiet suburban neighborhood was supposed to be ordinary, almost boring in its safety. We had the white picket fence, the Saturday barbecues, the family trips to Costco, the ritual of sitting in traffic on I-95 while arguing about whether to stop for McDonald's or Chick-fil-A. If America had a manual for the middle class, we were following it word for word. That was until I started noticing how her laughter no longer matched the jokes. It was sharp, cutting, like she was rehearsing a part in a play I was never invited to join. I used to tell myself I was paranoid. After all, infidelity was something that happened to men who ignored their wives, men who drank too much beer and watched too much football, men who forgot anniversaries. I was not that man. I remembered every date. I paid every bill. I kissed her forehead before bed. But paranoia has a way of transforming into prophecy in America, especially when your wife suddenly becomes obsessed with late nights at the office, even though she worked in HR for a company that closed at 5 p.m. sharp. The clues stacked up like junk mail on the kitchen counter. Her phone was always face down. Her perfume lingered even when she swore she had not gone out. And she suddenly cared way too much about Pilates classes led by an instructor named Brad, who looked like he had been sculpted by Michelangelo, but cursed like he had been raised in a biker bar. My suspicions reached their peak one Tuesday night when I came home early from work because my boss's wife had convinced him that Taco Tuesday was more important than deadlines. I walked in, and there she was, laughing in the living room with a man I had never met, her hand on his thigh like she was auditioning for a reality show titled Infidelity, the Suburban Season. She did not even look shocked. Instead, she twerked, that cheating wife grin stretching wide, and said, you are home early," as if I had interrupted her folding laundry. The man adjusted his belt with all the confidence of someone who had been there many times before. I expected guilt, tears, maybe even a dramatic apology. What I got was a monologue. She told me I was boring, predictable, too invested in family traditions like Sunday pancakes and Christmas lights. She told me this man understood her, that he was spontaneous, exciting, alive. And then, this is the part that makes even the devil in church weep, she laughed. She laughed while telling me I should pack my things and go. It was not a nervous laugh. It was not a guilty laugh. It was the kind of laugh a villain delivers in a movie right before pressing the button that launches the missiles. I remember standing there, suitcase in hand, realizing my whole American dream had been repossessed by karma and resold to the highest bidder, who happened to be a man with gym membership receipts and spray-tanned abs. She literally threw my clothes onto the driveway, one shirt at a time, while still laughing. The neighbors came out sipping beers and pretending not to watch, but you could feel their eyes on me, the sympathy hidden behind the blinds. In that moment, humiliation felt heavier than gravity itself. There I was, a grown man, a provider, a father, standing on my own lawn as if I were an unwanted guest. And she kept laughing, that cheating wife smile carved into her face like it was permanent. I swear I could hear the HOA whispering in the wind. This is what happens when you cannot keep your family together. Of course, I thought about fighting back, demanding respect, throwing his spray-tanned body into the hedges. But instead, I froze, because in that absurd moment I realized this was bigger than betrayal. This was theater. She had staged this entire humiliation as though it were her grand performance. And I was just an extra, the man with a suitcase, the husband who never saw the script until opening night. That night, I checked into a motel off Route 7, the kind of place where the ice machine never works, and the carpet has more secrets than the Pentagon. I sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the neon sign outside. I kept replaying her laugh, over and over, like a broken record. It did not feel real. It felt like parody, like some twisted conspiracy where the entire suburban block had been in on it. The infidelity was not just hers. It felt like the betrayal of the whole neighborhood, the whole idea of family, the whole fragile illusion that suburbia was safe from karma. Some men would drown their pain in whiskey. I drowned mine in thought. I imagined scenarios where she was actually part of a government experiment to test how much humiliation an American husband could endure before cracking. I imagined Brad was not a man at all, but a robot sent by Silicon Valley to destroy marriages for profit. I even wondered if maybe I had been replaced by an alternate version of myself in a parallel universe where the laws of loyalty no longer applied. When betrayal runs this deep, your mind grabs at every theory, even the absurd, because reality itself has already betrayed you. I fell asleep eventually, not with tears, but with a strange conviction. If this was theater, then I was no longer content to play the fool. If she had laughed while kicking me out, then I would make sure karma had the last laugh, and hers would be the smile that finally disappeared. At 3 a.m, the diner lights looked like a confession booth, humming above chipped Formica and coffee that has been brewed since the Carter administration. Sherry, who has been pouring coffee for truckers and insomniacs since the first Bush, slid a plate of blueberry pancakes in front of me and said, "You look like a man who has been mugged by a smile." I told her about the laughter, about the driveway, about the suitcase that felt heavier with humiliation than with fabric. She nodded like this was not news. In America, the diner hears everything before the church does. She refilled my cup and said, "There is a way through, sugar. First you sit, then you stand, then you let karma do her paperwork." She pronounced karma like it was a person on night shift, stamping forms with patient authority. Back in the motel, I found an envelope slid under my door. No return address, no note, only a stack of photocopies that smelled like a basement printer. The first page was a flyer for a wellness and wealth summit hosted by someone who looked suspiciously like Brad, except Brad in a white blazer and a headset microphone, pointing at a pyramid of vitamins stacked like a modern art installation. The second page was a receipt, a charge for a VIP couples package paid by my wife's card on the very day she told me our family budget was too tight for the kids' soccer cleats. The third page was an HOA newsletter congratulating our neighborly spirit ambassador on a successful block party, featuring photos of my cheating wife smiling beside coolers of seltzer and a banner that read, "New Beginnings." I had a sudden vision of conspiracy threads connecting all of it. A neighborhood culture machine, Brad's wellness cult, an HOA that staged bake sales like propaganda rallies, and in the middle of the web, that radiant carnivorous smile. The next evening, I went to the HOA meeting because humiliation does not cancel your voting rights. The clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and competitive small talk. The board sat behind a folding table with name tags and expressions that could curdle milk. My cheating wife floated in late, wearing white, like she had been canonized for her services to brunch. Brad stood in the back pretending to read the bylaws. The president announced a discussion about landscaping compliance, which is suburb code for judging each other's hedges. When public comment opened, I stood and thanked the board for their dedication to property values, then asked what the policy was on running a commercial wellness and wealth summit out of one's garage. There was a delicate silence, the sound of a snow globe being shaken. My wife's eyes narrowed, then calmed, then performed a smile that could have sold bridges in Arizona. She said I was confused, that it was simply a community fitness demonstration, that the word summit was fun branding. People clapped because clapping is safer than thinking. I left with nothing official, but I did not leave with nothing. In the parking lot, Mr. Alvarez, a retired city inspector with a mustache like a proud father, introduced himself and said he had seen a lot of unpermitted miracles in this neighborhood. He handed me a card from his wallet that said, "Alvarez Consulting, Compliance with Compassion." He said, if someone built a sauna in a garage without ventilation, that would be a code poem waiting to be written. Then he winked, which is the punctuation mark men of his generation use when they mean business. I began to reverse the story the way a projectionist reverses film. Instead of replaying the driveway humiliation, I stepped into scenes where I had agency and the plot bent toward me. I walked the neighborhood at twilight, that hour when sprinklers hiss and living room televisions glow with game shows and the ghost of the American dream strolls the sidewalks. People who had watched my exile from behind curtains now squeezed my shoulder and whispered small truths. The yoga teacher admitted Brad sold supplements out of his trunk. The mail carrier hinted that envelopes from unfamiliar creditors had started arriving at my old address with an urgency that tasted like iron. The teenager down the block confessed that he had been paid to design a website for Brad's Body Economy and that the logo looked like a triangle chasing a heart. Sherry helped me stage headquarters at a corner booth in the diner, which she called the Neighborhood Truth Commission, because that sounded legitimate and because she had a label maker. People came. People always come when a smile breaks and openings appear. A woman told me my cheating wife had asked her to host a divorce party where guests would sign a vision board covered in magazine cutouts of beaches and BMWs. A man confessed that Brad had offered him a ground floor opportunity in a cryptocurrency designed to monetize sweat. Sweat coin, he called it, with solemn pride, as if the ridiculous could be dignified if you said it slowly enough. I took notes. I made copies. I pinned strings between points not because I believed in conspiracy, but because collecting facts was a ritual that made the absurd behave. I did not invade. I did not hack. I did not trespass. I stayed lawful because karma dislikes shortcuts. But I did read what arrived in my legal mailbox, and my name was still on paper that mattered. A letter from the bank mentioned that the escrow account had been restructured. Restructured is a word that means someone reached into a piggy bank with good intentions and pulled out a wolf. I called the bank and listened to hold music that sounded like a dentist's waiting room. When a representative finally came on, she spoke in the careful tone people use in hospitals. She confirmed that changes had been made by the other name on the deed and that certain payments had been deferred. Deferred is the polite cousin of not paid. I thanked her and hung up and felt the shape of a future event forming, the way a storm makes your joints ache before the sky speaks. On Saturday afternoon, I attended the Wellness and Wealth Summit because satire works best in daylight. The gym had been decorated with banners bearing quotes attributed to success. My cheating wife stood at the check-in table with a smile that had been waxed for maximum shine. Brad took the stage and announced that infidelity is not a moral failing, but a metabolic recalibration of the heart. That family is what you build in the quiet spaces between ambition and self-care, that cheating is actually a form of spiritual fasting. People nodded because nodding feels like progress. He unveiled a new product called the Afterglow Cleanse, a blend of herbs that promised to launder your aura. The crowd applauded. A man in the back shouted about Sweatcoin reaching the moon. I imagined the moon filing a restraining order. The payment system glitched each time a card tapped the reader. Brad blamed the bank. Then he blamed Mercury in retrograde. Then he blamed the government. People began to ask for receipts, and the printer gave birth to blank paper. I watched my cheating wife whisper to a volunteer, watched the volunteer bring her a shoebox full of cash, watched her eyes flicker as she counted. The satire slipped, and the truth stepped forward wearing a cheap suit. It was an economy of improvisation. It was a tent revival of infidelity dressed as entrepreneurship. I realized I did not have to be the hero or the avenger. I only had to witness, to be the notary of karma. 2 days later, the city inspector's truck arrived at my old house. Mr. Alvarez walked the property with a clipboard like Moses touring a subdivision. He took notes on the sauna in the garage, on the exposed wiring, on the vinyl banner that turned the driveway into a marketplace. He posted a bright red notice that announced the poetry of consequences. Stop work, permit required. Correct within 14 days. The neighbors pretended not to read it. Then they read it again. Later that evening, a tow truck took away a car with expired plates. The air smelled like the first minutes after rain when dust remembers it is not invincible. My phone lit up with a text from my cheating wife. She wrote that I was pathetic, that I was trying to ruin her growth, that I was clinging to a dead marriage because I had no vision. She added 7 laugh emojis, even though I will not see the faces, because laughter is her punctuation. I stared at the screen until the words settled into their shapes. I did not reply. I took a walk instead, past yards with flags and bird feeders, past a little free library where a child had left a drawing of a family holding hands under a sky that looked like a blue crayon had been sharpened too aggressively. I thought about our children, about how family is not merchandise, about how karma may take her time but never loses a file. A letter arrived the next morning with a tone colder than accounting. It was a notice of delinquent taxes, the kind that speaks with the confidence of sheriffs. I read it twice. I placed it in a folder labeled Reality. Then I called a lawyer whose office smelled like old books and new beginnings. He explained that judges prefer order to chaos, that documentation sings while accusations hiss, that in matters of infidelity the court cares less about the poetry of pain and more about math. I thanked him and slid my notes across the desk like a student who had finally done the homework nobody assigned. That night in the motel, I cooked boxed macaroni on a hot plate against policy and considered the strange gift of quiet. The television muttered about football. The neon sign hummed. I wrote a letter to myself that began, "You are not the man in the driveway. You are the man who walked out of the frame." I did not pray for revenge. I did not draft manifestos. I made a simple promise to my future. I would keep my eyes open. I would remain polite. I would let the ridiculous reveal itself. Because in America, where conspiracy is a coping mechanism and parody is a mirror, the truth often arrives wearing a clown nose and carrying a calculator. 3 days later, my cheating wife invited me, with considerable sarcasm, to a co-parenting summit at a cafe that sells coffee like it is an ideology. She sat with her chin high and her hair shining like an endorsement deal. She said we needed to be adults. She said Brad was launching a franchise in 3 cities and that soon the neighborhood would understand who had vision. She said she would forgive me if I stopped being negative. The word forgive tasted bitter in her mouth, like a lemon that forgot the recipe for lemonade. I listened. I thanked her for the invitation. Then I told her I was rooting for her peace, not her brand. I told her I had no interest in fighting, only in facts. I told her that karma writes in fine print and does not need me to sharpen her pencil. She laughed again, but there was a crack in it now, a tiny fracture where a note went flat. You could miss it if you believed in invincibility. I did not believe in that anymore. When we stood to leave, Brad walked in like a weather report that promised sunshine forever. He reached out a hand and called me brother. I shook his hand because I was raised to be polite, and because sometimes the most subversive thing a man can do is refuse to perform hatred. He whispered that we could all be friends once I stopped clinging to old stories. I smiled in a calm way and said, I am very interested in new stories, especially the ones where the math adds up. He blinked, not used to mathematics in a cafe. I walked out into a sky that was trying to decide between blue and gray. Across the street, a church sign read, "Mercy is not the same as permission." I did not know what would happen next. I only knew that the plot had tilted, that the house of cards was considering gravity, that the smile that had once been a weapon was learning about weight. Somewhere in the city, a printer was warming up for the next notice. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a child was asking a parent why there was a red paper on a garage door. Somewhere in a ledger, numbers were refusing to pretend. And somewhere very close, maybe in the soft place right behind my ribs, karma checked a box, stapled a packet, and moved the file to the top of the stack. America loves a comeback story, but nobody mentions the chapters that smell like mildew and reheated noodles. The motel became my monastery, my training ground, my comedy stage, depending on the hour. By day, I worked clocking hours at a company that sold office supplies to people who believed staplers were still sacred. By night, I built my survival rituals: push-ups on a stained carpet, late-night calls with my kids where I described bedtime in colors instead of numbers, long walks past strip malls glowing like neon confessionals. It was not glamorous, but struggle rarely is. The humiliation still replayed in my skull like reruns of a sitcom I hated but could not cancel. The driveway scene, the suitcase, the neighbor's eyes behind curtains, they haunted me. But America gives even ghosts their commercials. Between each flashback, I started hearing other voices. Sherry at the diner reminding me karma keeps notes. Alvarez the inspector telling me codes never lie. My lawyer explaining that math will outlast performance. The absurd began to feel less like conspiracy and more like choreography, the steps of a dance designed to strip away my old illusions until I could stand without wobbling. I joined a gym not because I wanted muscles, but because I wanted mirrors that did not laugh. There I met a crowd of other men in exile. A guy whose wife left him for a minor league baseball player. A guy whose girlfriend ran off with his parole officer. A guy who swore his cheating wife had been abducted by aliens and replaced with a clone that could not cook lasagna. We laughed too hard at each other's misery, and the laughter turned into medicine. In America, they say laughter is the best medicine, but sometimes it is the only affordable one. Meanwhile, reports trickled in from the old neighborhood like dispatches from a foreign war. My children mentioned weird meetings in the garage. A neighbor emailed me a blurry photo of Brad in a shiny suit pointing at a whiteboard full of arrows and dollar signs. Another neighbor confessed that the wellness summit had been shut down mid-speech because the fire alarm went off and nobody knew where the exits were. The satire wrote itself. Infidelity had not just broken my family, it had mutated into a franchise. The cheating wife, who once mocked my devotion to Sunday pancakes, was now hosting seminars on reimagining domestic freedom. The lawyer guided me through the paperwork minefield. Custody hearings, tax filings, financial disclosures. It was like wading through a swamp armed only with a ballpoint pen. Each form carried the weight of betrayal, but also the promise of balance. Judges do not care about laughter in driveways, he reminded me. Judges care about receipts. So I gathered them like a squirrel, preparing for a particularly judgmental winter. Receipts of unpaid bills, screenshots of absurd seminars, letters from banks. Slowly, I constructed a fortress of facts. Brad's empire began to wobble. The sweat coin scheme attracted the wrong kind of attention. People who wanted refunds instead of enlightenment. The Afterglow cleanse was exposed as repackaged oregano. The HOA discovered that unpermitted saunas attract mold faster than disciples. My cheating wife doubled down, wearing her smile like a helmet, insisting it was all temporary, that every visionary is mocked before they are crowned. But the crown was slipping. Her laughter grew shriller, as if it needed caffeine to survive. At night, I imagined alternate endings. Sometimes I pictured her empire thriving, Brad on television selling sweat coin as the currency of the future, my cheating wife smiling beside him, our children wearing matching branded tracksuits. Other nights I imagined her alone in a half-empty garage, the banners torn, the vitamins expired, her smile reduced to a nervous tic. Both visions felt possible. Both were terrifying in their own ways. I poured myself into my children instead. On weekends, I took them to minor league baseball games where the mascots danced like unpaid philosophers. We ate hot dogs under stadium lights and laughed at the absurdity of men in oversized costumes racing each other for no prize. We built new traditions, movie nights with cheap popcorn, camping trips in the backyard, pancake dinners on Wednesdays. They began to see that family is not about addresses, but about rituals that survive humiliation, and still the neighborhood whispered. People stopped avoiding me and started seeking me out. One woman confessed she had invested in Sweatcoin and lost her savings. A man admitted he had been convinced to buy a lifetime supply of the Afterglow cleanse and now had a garage full of oregano. They wanted justice. They wanted someone to say the words out loud. This was not wellness, this was fraud. This was infidelity turned into enterprise. I stood taller each day, not because the pain vanished, but because it calcified into something solid. Struggle has a way of turning bones into scaffolding. The man who had once frozen on a driveway now walked into courtrooms with evidence. The neighbors who once whispered now shook my hand. My children who once saw me as exiled now saw me as present. Karma was not a lightning bolt. She was a ledger, slow but precise. And the funniest part, the part that made me laugh alone in my motel room like a lunatic, was realizing that her smile was starting to look tired. In photos, it stretched too wide, like an actor refusing to leave the stage after the curtain fell. She was still laughing, but laughter without conviction is just noise. And noise cannot drown out the arithmetic of consequences. Because every day that I stood, she slipped. Every form I filed, every witness I listened to, every child's laugh I preserved, it all tilted the stage. And though I did not yet see the collapse, I could hear the creaks. The theater was about to change scenes. The spotlight was shifting. And somewhere off stage, Karma licked her pencil, flipped a page, and prepared her punchline. In America, Karma does not ride a white horse. She drives a county-issued sedan with a clipboard on the passenger seat and a badge that reads, Department of Enforcement. You think she is late, you think she has forgotten you, but then she arrives on time according to her own calendar, and suddenly the whole street knows her name. For my cheating wife, Karma showed up not as thunder or lightning, but as paperwork, subpoenas, and the kind of laughter that echoes when your neighbors no longer believe you. It began with the foreclosure notice taped to the front door of the house she had stolen with her smile. Red paper, bold type, the kind of announcement that speaks louder than sermons. The neighbors did not whisper this time. They stood in clusters on the sidewalk, pretending to talk about football while clearly staring at the sign. Brad tried to pull it down, but a deputy warned him that tampering with official postings was a misdemeanor. His grin cracked for the first time. My cheating wife, still in her Sunday white, told anyone who would listen that it was a mistake, a clerical error, a conspiracy by jealous people who could not stand to see a family reinvent itself. But conspiracies are only fun when they involve UFOs or Elvis sightings. Nobody wants to believe in a conspiracy made of bounced checks. Then came the IRS letter. Sherry at the diner handed it to me first because the mail carrier had dropped it at the wrong box, or maybe because Karma prefers dramatic delivery. Notice of audit, it said, the phrase printed in a font that could end marriages by itself. I did not open it. I did not need to. I knew what it meant. The empire of vitamins, Sweatcoin, and Afterglow cleanses was about to be weighed, measured, and found ridiculous. When I finally did peek inside, the numbers looked like a toddler had been allowed to manage a hedge fund. Expenses claimed as spiritual development. Income categorized as celestial donations. Karma's comedy is paperwork. Court was the stage for the final act. She arrived in designer heels, Brad by her side, in a blazer that smelled like desperation, both of them armed with smiles that had survived too many wars. She told the judge I was bitter, vindictive, obsessed. She called me a saboteur of growth, a saboteur of wellness, a saboteur of dreams. The judge, a man with glasses perched so low they looked like accusations, did not blink. He listened to receipts. He listened to bank statements. He listened to a city inspector describe the unpermitted sauna that nearly electrocuted 3 neighbors. He listened to a woman testify that she had lost her savings in sweatcoin. He listened to my children's quiet voices describe the chaos in their once stable home. When it was my turn, I did not deliver speeches. I did not perform. I simply placed documents in neat piles, one after another, until the judge raised his hand, like a conductor stopping an orchestra. "That is enough," he said, which in American courtrooms translates to, "The story has been written." The ruling stripped away her illusions the way autumn strips a tree. Custody tilted toward me because stability outweighs spectacle. Finances tilted toward accountability because math is not sentimental. The house was scheduled for sale, its value devoured by unpaid debts. Brad whispered furiously into her ear, but whispers do not stop gravity. She smiled at me across the courtroom, tried to laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. For the first time in years, the weapon failed. Her smile disappeared, not because I had crushed it, but because karma had repossessed it. Afterward, she cornered me in the hallway, away from the cameras of neighbors and the pens of clerks. Her voice cracked. She said she had made mistakes, that she wanted to fix things, that family should not end like this. She reached for my hand the way a drowning person reaches for driftwood. For a second, I saw the woman I had once loved, the mother of my children, the partner who had shared drive-through milkshakes on long road trips. But then I remembered the driveway, the laughter, the humiliation staged as theater. I gently pulled my hand away. "Family is sacred," I told her, "but infidelity breaks more than vows. It breaks the math of trust. Karma is not mine to control. She is only here to balance the books." Brad stormed past, muttering about starting over in Texas, as if geography could erase arithmetic. I watched them leave together, their figures smaller with every step, like characters exiting a stage after the audience has already gone home. Back at the diner, Sherry poured me coffee and said, "So the smile finally left her?" I nodded. "Smiles are rentals," she said. "Truth is a mortgage." Outside the window, the neon buzzed, and I felt the weight lift. My children came in, sliding into the booth, ordering pancakes at night because tradition can be remixed but never destroyed. We laughed together, not with cruelty, not with parody, but with the simple joy of people who had survived absurdity and found their footing. The neighborhood moved on quickly. New families arrived. Old banners were taken down. The house, once filled with seminars, was sold to a retired couple who planted roses instead of slogans. People forgot the details, but they remembered the feeling. And sometimes, when I walked past, I swore the house itself was laughing. Not the cruel laugh of my cheating wife, but the relieved laugh of a building that had survived theater and returned to silence. As for me, I stopped being the man in the motel. I rented an apartment near the park where my kids could ride bikes. I started attending town meetings not out of revenge, but out of curiosity. I dated cautiously, slowly, because trust is not rebuilt in a single season. And in quiet moments I realized I no longer hated her. Hate takes energy, and I had better things to do. What I felt was something stranger, softer, like gratitude that her betrayal had forced me through the furnace into a life I would never have chosen, but now would never trade. That is the punchline, the part karma always saves for last. The revelation that the humiliation was not the end of the story, but the setup. The cheating wife laughed while kicking me out, but the last laugh belonged not to me, not to Brad, not even to the neighbors. It belonged to Karma herself, who waited patiently until the stage was ready, until the receipts were printed, until the children were safe, until the smile cracked. Then she walked on stage, stamped her forms, closed the file, and left us all staring at the empty space where a grin used to be. And in that silence, I finally heard the truth. Betrayal is loud, but justice whispers. You just have to be patient enough to listen.